Anything else you want to add up there?
Explorers, what was the other one? Explorers.
Oh, we discover.
Discover, that's the word.
We take joy in discovery. This is why we are motivated to go to school, and we actually get the physical sensation of joy somewhere in this part of our bodies when we learn something new that intrigues us.
I'd say we're driven.
We're driven, we're ambitious, we have passion. All right, thank you. I think that this is a very good, you did well. I think we'd have a chance of surviving. This is a very good list of what human beings are. Would this also be a list of what a leader is? Is there anything on here? Think of the greatest leaders you know from your family, your church, your university, your training, your job, people you've read about. Is there anything on here that a leader wouldn't have?
Might not be fruitful.
It's true.
Some
Although,
leaders are.
if you look at the news, a lot of them want to be very fruitful, or at least play as if they're being fruitful.
They're not all humble.
They're not all humble. Okay. We're going to draw circles around the ones that you are going to throw some question around. Now, I'm talking about great leaders. Leaders that would inspire you. Anything else? Ladies and gentlemen, you've just done something very interesting. You have taken the essence of the human person. You have put forward in this setting what you think are the finest qualities of the human person. All of us have them to some degree. And you have distinguished basically that leaders have this. There is a conclusion you can draw from what you just did. Where am I going? You are leaders. You have every one of these qualities. Now here's what I want you to think about. You don't necessarily lead today, but you might lead tomorrow. And certain things have to happen in your life if you want to lead tomorrow. You have to be self-confident. You have to know that you have the capacity to lead. You have to have a vision of improving something that needs improving. You have to have the passion to want to bring about that change and to overcome all of the obstacles that will be in your way before you can actually make the improvement happen. Those are some of the foundational things. But it's interesting, all of the things that you've put up here that you admire about us as humans are things that exist either highly developed or in seed form in you. Now let's look at what happens. Let's break these apart just a little bit. What happens to leaders who are not humble, who are not willing to admit they have flaws?
Lose followers.
They what?
Lose followers.
They lose followers because they're arrogant. They lose trust because they lose really a connection with people. I had a very interesting conversation. Yesterday I had a conversation with our provost. We had lunch just a few hundred feet from here. Gail Davis. How many of you know Gail? She's a wonderful provost at our university. She addressed the Leadership Academy recently, as several of you know. Gail and I were talking about the role of brokenness in leadership. She is somebody who has risen to a great leadership responsibility here at this university. She came from a very, very difficult background. There's a lot of fear. You can watch this on YouTube, on our site. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of alcoholism. There was a lot of things that would break a child in her family. But she and her brother somehow rose out of it. Her brother ended up winning 2 Pulitzer Prizes in journalism. She ends up being a provost of the university, the second highest officer in this university, coming from an environment that would have broken many, many children and young people. So we had this very interesting philosophical conversation over a hot dog yesterday. That's all they were serving in the faculty dining room yesterday, hot dogs. And I asked Gail, I said, do you think that being very aware of your flaws, struggling with those flaws, even to the point of having been broken somewhat in life, makes leaders stronger or weaker? And she said something which I thought she would say, coming from her background. She said, absolutely makes them stronger. And the medical analogy here is, if a bone breaks, and poor Kathy Rent knows this because of her unfortunate accident this summer, if a bone breaks and the doctor goes back and resets it, and sometimes will even add metal to reinforce it, it's going to be a stronger bone in the end than the bone that did not break. It's ironic, but all that scar tissue, all that tissue that's fusing everything back together sometimes is stronger if it's reset correctly. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what happens to us in life. We get broken by life. We get challenged sometimes to the point of breaking. And it's in the breaking that we have to find the resources through the love around us and through who we are inside us to put ourselves back together. Now, two things happen when that occurs. If you have been broken, and every good leader at some point in life has been broken by something, you put yourself back together, two things happen. The first thing that happens is you know you have the strength to overcome terrible obstacles. You have now self-confidence because you're strong. And the second thing that happens, which is very important, it's not inner-directed, it's outer-directed. The second thing that happens is that all of a sudden you have compassion for others. You're maybe not so judgmental about other people's lives. You have compassion for their brokenness, what they've gone through. This makes you a much better co-worker, boss, colleague, President of the United States, whatever you want to be. If you know the people around you are self-conscious of flaws, they've been humbled by life, you work with them. It makes it so much easier to bring them along because you show compassion rather than just hitting them like a hammer on an anvil. So leaders who go through this process, if you look at our generation of leaders who fought in Vietnam, for example, and they come back and they know what soldiers go through. It's often said, generals are the most reluctant people to send young men and women into war. How many of you have served in the military? Is it true?
Yeah.
It's the civilians who have never fought a war who are often the quickest to say, let's go to war. That's been our experience in the United States. So often it's the generals. If you look at the debates, the key debates in our history, it's the generals, especially after Vietnam, who said we have to have everything in place. That way fewer men and women will die. If we don't have everything in place, we might be in a tragic situation where more Americans die than should die. That's very typical the way a general would think, because they know the pain of war. How ironic is that? That the people who are trained for war actually counsel peace very often. And the people who are not trained in war are often the ones who are most eager for us to become an empire. Not to politicize this discussion, not to politicize what we're about in this, but I think we saw a lot of that in America's past, where people who have not had much military experience have been very eager sometimes to spread American power at the sacrifice, loss of life, both of Americans and people abroad. So we need to be aware of that. People who suffer, who struggle, often are very wise. This goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks, goes back to the Bible, the Old Testament. The idea is that we only really learn the lessons that count through suffering. This is something that Aeschylus wrote about in all of his plays. It's something that comes out of Ecclesiastes. It comes out of the book of Job in the Old Testament. Whatever your tradition, sacred or secular, whatever your tradition, it seems the wisdom of the species is that we only learn through suffering.